Okay, so my talk is going to be about infant learning. And learning to move is one of the most important tasks of infancy. So, what is it that babies are learning? They're learning about their bodies, what their bodies can do in relation to the environment. They're learning what they can do in the world. All of the data that I'm going to talk about are with typically developing infants, but I believe that all of the principles that I'll talk about apply to children with autism or any other kind of disability. So, movements create opportunities for learning. And by opportunities, I mean potential information. Without opportunities, without information, there can be no learning. So, if movements are restricted or changed because of a disability, then those opportunities for learning are subsequently changed or disappeared. Babies move everything. They move their eyes, their arms, their legs, their bodies. They move their body parts so that they can look around, so that they can touch things, so they can locomote, and so they can interact with the social environment. This video is of a typical 14-month-old during normal everyday activity. And all of infants' movements, this baby and all babies, all of their movements generate potential information for learning. I'm going to show you the same clip again. So what you just saw is the clip in the top right. But now I'm going to show you where that baby was pointing its eyes while performing all of those actions. So this crosshair is showing you the baby's point of gaze. Looking, I want to remind you, is a movement. It's a motor action. And infants learn to look. And looking creates massive opportunities for learning. This is a timeline illustration of that same 15-second video clip. Each row on the timeline is a different source of information. Babies move their eyes and their heads to look at different things like objects and surfaces and people. Babies move their arms and their hands so that they can touch and manipulate and carry things like objects. And then babies hear speech from their caregivers and they move their own mouths and their own faces so that they can vocalize and generate facial expressions. I think in motor development, probably the most ignored part of the body is the face. And the face is, really got all the things that make life really worth living. It's got eating and swallowing and talking and making facial expressions. And then babies locomote, and that's my specialty. So I think locomotion is really one of the coolest things that they do. But they walk and they climb over different kinds of surfaces. Now, this is only 4 sources of information. There's many, many more. My point is that this is 15 seconds of normal baby life, right? Movements generate opportunities for learning. And William James, way back when, famously called infant's world one great blooming, buzzing confusion. I think you can see that infant's world is definitely buzzing, but they're not confused. Infants flexibly switch their attention from one source of information to another, and they multitask. They carry objects, they talk, they're socially interacting, they're looking at things, they're listening to things while they're running around. Okay, I also want to make the point, don't assume that you know where children are looking. So for years and years and years, developmental scientists made assumptions about where babies are looking from a third-person camera view. So like there would be a camera out here looking at this gentleman, and based on what this camera sees, I make inferences about where he's looking. Um, we didn't really know where babies were looking until we developed a new technology that's called head-mounted eye tracking. And that's the funny apparatus that that baby was wearing in the video clip that you saw. So for example, previous work before head-mounted eye tracking suggested that infants look at their mothers a lot. Looks to mom, not so much. um, Infants who are freely moving around, playing with their mothers in a playroom, they only look at their mom following 54% of her vocalizations. So when mom says, Alice, Alice, or, look at this, or come here, sweetie, or, I'm alive, or whatever, babies only turn to look at their mother 54% of the time. 46% of the time, they just keep on looking at whatever they were doing before mom spoke. And of the times that infants bother to look at their mothers, they rarely look at her face. That's the red box. Instead, they look at her body or her hands. And these are eye track data from a group of 14-month-olds during spontaneous free play. I don't have data, I don't know why I didn't bring it, but we have data um, of where both the mother and the baby are wearing head-mounted eye trackers, and mothers are keeping their baby's face in view almost all of the time, but the babies are not doing likewise. These are typically developing healthy infants. Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, one more thing about that. Part of it is that mom is up high. But there's, no reason the baby can't crank its head up a little bit. They just can't be bothered. And maybe they know, like, it's mom, you're still there, you're still blabber, you're still talking. And like, there's no real need to look at her. But even in a tabletop tasks, even when like strange things are happening where we had assumed that, babies were making contact at mother's face and getting information from mother's face, with a head mounted eye tracker, you can actually ask, is the baby looking at mother's face and getting information from mother's face? Not so much. And the thing is about opportunities for learning, if you don't look at it, you didn't see it, that wasn't an opportunity for learning, nothing happened there. You have to see it if it's going to be visual information. You have to look at it. Okay, I want to focus for a minute on opportunities for learning during locomotion, because during locomotion, the opportunities for learning are varied, they're distributed, and they are immense. This is a schematic drawing of the playroom in my laboratory. And this is what infant locomotion looks like. That squiggly blue line is the typical path of a 13-month-old walking infant in the first 10 minutes of spontaneous activity. Their locomotion is varied. They're traveling along twisty, turny, omnidirectional paths. They're visiting different places, and they're exploring the spaces that they are in. Baby's locomotion is distributed in time. So their locomotion is distributed in short bursts of activity that are separated by longer periods of rest. Occasionally, a rest period is instigated because the baby fell, but usually babies just stop walking. So that was a fall, but usually babies just stop walking and stand there and do whatever for a while. On average, they're only in motion 30% of the time. 70% of the time, they're stationary. This raster plot shows the distribution of walking bouts for 60 infants over 30 minutes of spontaneous walking. So each little row here represents a different infant's data, and they're sorted by the least experienced walker at the top to the most experienced walker at the bottom. And the little bursts of black mean the baby is in motion. That's the time when they're walking. And the white means they're not walking. And you can see that walking is distributed over time, even for the newest walker and for the most experienced walker. And that means that each little bout of locomotion is happening in a slightly different place in the room. And there's a different psychological context, there's a different social context. And each little start and stop is giving the baby information about fighting gravity and inertia. The opportunities for learning are immense. So this graph is showing you the accumulated number of steps per hour plotted against days of walking experience. Each little symbol, each little circle is a different baby. And these are infants between 12 and 19 months of age. The circles are infants that we tested in the laboratory playroom, and the crosses are infants that we tested in their homes. You can see they look exactly the same. And the number of steps that infants spontaneously produce during free play, it's just like baby and mom in a room, do what you want, and we count up all the steps. The number of steps that they spontaneously produce increases with days of walking experience. This is spontaneous activity, so infants don't have to walk at all. There's no task. They could just sit on the floor and play with their mom in one place. But they do walk. They walk a lot. The average toddler takes, 2,368 steps per hour. If you extrapolate that out, that's about 14,000 steps in a waking day. They travel immense distances. So each point here is the distance if you strung all of the infant's steps together end to end. The average toddler is traveling 701 meters in an hour. You know, how much is that? That's 8 football fields in an hour, or 46 football fields over the course of a day. And they fall a lot, and falls decrease with days of walking experience. The average toddler falls 17 times an hour, 100 times a day. What about objects? Object activity is also varied, distributed, and immense. 11 to 13-month-olds spend 30 to 40 minutes on average out of each hour playing with objects. That's a huge amount of their life in contact with handheld objects. These data here are from spontaneous home observations. Babies don't have to be playing at all, and they don't have to be touching an object, but they do, and they are. They're touching lots of different objects, often all at once. So opportunities for learning are immense, they're varied, and they're distributed. Every movement creates an opportunity for learning. Infants move every body part, including their eyes. Looking, touching, locomoting, social interactions, these occur simultaneously or in quick succession. So rapid switching among different sources of information, and maintaining attention on one source of information while multitasking with other things. This is part of natural infant everyday activity. So I don't know, but for children with a behavioral disability like autism, or differences, where differences in their motor behaviors, including things like looking, that could create a different set of opportunities for learning. There's actually been a lot made out of children with autism, where they do and where they don't look. And I think what we really need is work using a head-mounted eye tracker so we can see where they look when they're freely interacting in the world. So get them out from in front of the computer monitor and ask, where are these children actually looking when they're engaged in everyday life? All right. So what do infants learn from all of that movement? They learn about affordances for action. They're learning about their body, they're learning about the environment, and they're learning about the relations between their own bodies and the environment. Well, affordance is a scientific term that was coined by J.J. Gibson, and it means possibilities for action. So an affordance is the fit or the relation between aspects of your body and features of the environment that make a particular action possible. So like to walk up a stair, your legs have to be long enough and strong enough, and you have to have enough balance relative to the height of the riser and the depth of the tread. To, reach out and grasp an object, your hand has to be big enough and strong enough, and you have to have sufficient coordination in all the parts of the hand relative to the object's size and its weight and its distance from you. A classic example of affordance perception is a drop-off. So a small drop-off is a step, and it affords locomotion. A large drop-off to a baby is a cliff, and locomotion is impossible. So the trick is to perceive the difference between a cliff and a step. So I'm going to tell you about a recent study with an adjustable drop-off that shows how new ways of moving create new affordances. 12-month-old experienced crawlers select their actions adaptively. They will easily crawl down drop-offs that are within their ability, but they will refuse to crawl down drop-offs that are beyond their ability. Experienced crawlers perceive affordances for locomotion over a drop-off. They do so accurately, it's within 1 centimeter of accuracy. That's quite good. It's really good. But I want to show you what happens in the same age infants who are new to a form of locomotion. So these are babies who are new walkers. New walkers will attempt repeatedly to walk over a drop-off that is beyond their abilities. Even a gigantic drop-off, this is a 90 centimeter, this is a 3-foot drop-off. Novice walkers will plunge right over the edge. So these babies have no clue about the limits of their abilities. They do not perceive affordances for locomotion. But 6 months later, after infants have had a few months of walking experience, now they're selecting their actions adaptively. So they can perceive precisely within 1 centimeter of accuracy whether that drop off is safe for walking or they need an alternative method to get down. And um, the experienced 18-month-olds look just like experienced 12-month-old crawlers. So they know precisely if a drop off is too high for walking, and they can find other ways to cope with it. So if they want to get down. Now, here's the data. So 0 on this graph represents the largest drop off that each baby could navigate. So it means we took all the data and normalized it to each infant's ability. So 0 represents for every baby, that's the drop off they could go down 50% of the time. The negative numbers are safe drop offs that are smaller than their threshold. And the positive numbers are risky drop offs that are larger than their threshold. And this red curve is showing you experienced 12-month-old crawlers. These babies are perfect. They're probability matching. They're matching the probability of attempting to crawl with the probability of succeeding. This is as good as it gets. Okay, now in blue, I've added the novice 12-month-old walkers. These babies are vastly overestimating their abilities. They are attempting drop-offs that are 9 centimeters too large on 75% of the trials. They are attempting that 90-centimeter drop-off on 50% of the trials. This group is the same age as the crawlers, but they had not learned to perceive the relations between the height of the drop off and their abilities at their new locomotor posture. And now I've added in the 18-month-old experienced walkers in green. These guys perceive equally well as the experienced crawlers. So infants are coordinating perception and action through experience with each perception action system. Crawling experience is teaching infants to perceive affordances for crawling, and walking experience teaches infants to perceive affordances for walking. But there is no transfer from the earlier to the later developing posture. I think that longitudinal data show this very dramatically, that there's no transfer from an earlier to a later developing perception action system. So this is a typical infant in the first week of crawling. And the babies will attempt to crawl down slopes like that's an error. They're attempting to crawl down slopes that are impossibly steep relative to their abilities. But 10 weeks later, when the babies have had 10 weeks of crawling experience, on 50% of the trials, they will correctly reject a slope that's too steep. So like they would die half the time and they would live half the time. But by 20 weeks of crawling experience, these babies have fast and efficient exploratory movements, and they can tell within 2 degrees of slant whether a slope is safe or risky for crawling. But then when these same babies stand up the next week and do the same task, face the same slope, now as novice walkers, learning has to start all over again. They make just as many mistakes in their first week of walking as they had done in their first week of crawling. And after 10 weeks of walking, errors again have decreased to about 50%. So learning is no faster the second time around. Yeah. And we see the same specificity of learning in other transitions between earlier and later developing postures. Like when infants make the transition from being an experienced sitter to a novice crawler, what they've learned over all those weeks of keeping balance in a sitting posture does not help them when they begin crawling. So this is a typical 9-month-old, And the babies in this experiment had, on average, 3 months of sitting experience. And their task is to decide how far they can lean out over this adjustable gap in the surface of support to reach a toy that's on the end of that stick. And their mom's down there saying, "Get that toy." And that's a highly trained experimenter who is ensuring the infant's safety. And the babies have to decide whether they can reach over that adjustable gap and get the toy or not. In an experienced sitting posture, they're accurate within 2 centimeters. But when we test the same babies in the same session, now in a novice crawling posture, they've only been crawling for less than 1 month. They have no idea about the limits of their abilities. They do not behave as if they know that this big drop off is too large. This big gap in the surface of support is too large to allow them to crawl. So infants learn and relearn over and over to move. What do they learn? They're learning to perceive and to exploit new affordances for action. Learning from an earlier developing skill does not transfer to a later developing skill. Why not? Because new skills are creating new affordance relations, and new skills mean new information gathering systems. Affordances for crawling and walking are different because there's different relations between the body and the environment. There's also different vantage points relative to the ground, and there's different visual and haptic and proprioceptive information. There's different forces. You're using different body parts in order to move. I assume that disabilities can alter perception action systems, the ways that we use our bodies, and thereby there's different affordances and there's different ways of getting information about the affordances. Now, so far, I've only been talking about perceptual information as if infants learn to move all on their own. But of course, that's not true. This photo shows a baby at the top of a very steep slope trying to decide whether it's safe to walk down. And it's not just a physical situation, it's also a social situation because there's an experimenter beside the baby who could, provide assistance. And there's a mother at the bottom of the slope who's helping the infant to figure it out. And I think this is especially important in the case of autism, where so much has been made about their ability to um, access and use social information. So, how do infants weigh and integrate perceptual information that they generate from their own exploratory movements with social information that's offered by their mothers? Well, in these experiments, we found the steepest slope that each infant could walk down. So that's their threshold slope. That takes about 40 trials to get a good psychophysical estimate of the baby's threshold slope. Then we asked the moms to encourage and discourage their babies to walk down safe slopes that, by definition, they're safe because they're shallower than this baby's threshold, risky slopes that are steeper than their baby's threshold, and ambiguous slopes. They're truly ambiguous. The probability of success is 50% right at the threshold. So that's an additional 24 trials. These are data from 18-month-old experienced walkers. These babies ignore social information at safe slopes and at risky slopes. They always walk down safe slopes, even when their mom is saying, no, Donald, do not walk down. They walk down the safe slopes. And they never walk down the risky slopes, even when their mom is saying, do it, come to mommy. They do not do it. But at the threshold slopes, where the perceptual information is truly uncertain, the probability of success is uncertain. Now, infants are treating their mothers as a reservoir of useful social information. And now they defer to the mother's social message. Mom says walk. They walk on 75% of the trials. Mom says don't walk. They only attempt 25% of the trials. This is a clip of a typical infant at the threshold slope. So it's quite a steep slope. It's quite a good walker. And the mom is encouraging. So the baby's going to try to walk down.
Come here, little buddy. Go. Get ahead. Go.
All right, same baby, same threshold slope. Only now the mom is discouraging the baby from coming down. So the baby does not try it.
Stay there. Stay there. Okay? Anthony, no. 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 Stay there. Anthony, Jared, do not come down here. You hear me? Stay there. Ah, don't. Do not come down.
Okay. All right. We figured if it's really true that experienced infants only defer to social information at the region of true uncertainty, then if we could experimentally change that region of uncertainty, then the babies should move the region where they use social information. So we put 18-month-olds in Teflon soled shoes so that we could change the region of uncertainty. Teflon soled shoes are really slippery. If not for wearing these Teflon soled shoes, this slope would be totally easy to walk down, but it's really slippery, Teflon against carpet. Um, so the Teflon shoes transformed experienced, highly skilled 18-month-old walkers into poorly skilled walkers. So we changed the baby's level of walking skill, and therefore we moved the region of uncertainty to a shallow range of slopes. Here's decisions to walk for 18-month-olds wearing Teflon soled shoes. And now the x-axis is just the absolute degree of slope. And here's a shallow range of slopes between 0 and 15 degrees. These are now the slopes that are uncertain. They used to be safe, now they're uncertain. Here's a medium range of slopes between 15 and 30 degrees. These are the formerly uncertain slopes, like when the baby was barefoot or wearing sneakers, normal shoes. And then here's the steep slopes that are always risky. So the infants still knew that steep slopes are risky. They really are risky. But now, on the shallowest slopes, even at 0 degrees, infants are deferring to their mother's social information. They're more likely to try to walk down when their mother encourages them, and they're more likely not to walk when their mother discourages them. Infants obtain perceptual information generated by their own exploratory activity, and they get and use social information that's offered by others. Babies have to weigh and integrate multiple sources of information, and that requires continual updating and recalibration. This may be especially problematic for children with autism, where presumably it's more difficult for them to request and to use social information from others to guide their actions. Right, so some affordances, like drop-offs and slopes, these are directly accessible to perceptual systems, especially to vision. So, as a consequence, experienced infants can respond adaptively to a novel situation on their first encounter. But many, perhaps most of the affordances in our everyday lives are hidden. The possibilities for action are not directly accessible to our perceptual systems. Closures are a particularly good example of hidden affordances. Now, opening closures is part of our everyday activities, like from the time you wake up and open the toothpaste tube and open the spigot on your, water in the sink till the time you go to sleep. And to a neophyte, affordances of closures are not directly accessible to perception. Think about showers and how often, like when you're traveling especially, you have struggled with knobs and spigots on an unfamiliar shower stall, and you're trying to get water to come out, and you're trying to get it to not scald you or freeze you. Think about doors. How do children learn whether to push or pull a handle, or that they need to turn a knob or push a lever? A door shouldn't need to come with an instruction manual. But think how often you push when you should pull. It's not like a drop off or a slope. And think about clothes, zippers and buttons and snaps and hooks. All of these are hidden affordances. And containers like water bottles. Water bottles require an unscrewing action, and it has to be to the left. How would you learn that? Or Tupperware requires a pulling action, but you should really focus your energy at the corner of the container. And soda cans have like that little metal tab that you have to push down and then pull up. Adults deal with hidden affordances of 50 different types of closures every day. Here's a tour through a typical supermarket. Since the beginning of history, humans have created new affordances by building different kinds of packaging and containers that have different kinds of closures. Those Greek urns, like whatever, all the way back. As long as we've had human history, we have had closures that had specific affordances for how to get access to the stuff inside. Closures have been part of every culture, and they're absolutely part of everybody's everyday life. In principle, children could learn about hidden affordances in two ways. So they could figure it out for themselves through trial and error exploration, or they could learn about hidden affordances through social information, like they could get instruction or help from their caregivers. So we asked whether either form of learning, so do it on your own learning or learn it from others, can teach young children about hidden affordances. So, we're investigating for the first time how children learn about hidden affordances in the special sort of model system of opening closures. We started with screw caps. So, these are those like a water bottle where you have to twist the lid repeatedly to the left to get it open. And the children really want to get these jars open because all the containers were transparent and they had a yummy treat inside. So the goal is visible, but how do you get to the goal? The actions required to get to the goal are invisible. How do you figure out what they are? Success at opening screw top closures increased with age. And the area of interest on this graph is between 18 and 30 months of age. 18-month-olds can't get the things open, but 30-month-olds can open screw top closures. And their success is not predicted by their mother's report of whether children can open screw top closures or any other type of closure in their home. So there's some evidence that children can learn about hidden affordances on their own over the course of a session, at least in our lab. How'd they figure it out? What are they learning when they're learning about hidden affordances? Well, 12-month-olds try a variety of really inappropriate and futile strategies. They're banging and shaking and mouthing and whatever on these bottles. By by 18 months of age, children are starting to try reasonable things. So they're starting to figure out that they need to unscrew the lid, and they also do a lot of pulling, which is also a reasonable strategy for a hidden affordance of a closure. By 21 months, infants are executing the unscrewing action on most of the trials. But remember, they're only successful half the time at this age. So, through trial and error, infants can figure out that the closure can rotate, but they haven't learned to keep turning it to the left and to keep turning until you've cleared all the threads. I'm showing you both of those graphs together. By 21 months, infants know to unscrew. By 24 months, all those other inappropriate, weird strategies have dropped out. But it's not until 30 months of age that most children can open something like a jar or a water bottle. And that means that for babies, the first problem is learning the appropriate strategy. The affordance is hidden. What action am I supposed to do? Then the second problem is just implementing it. So it's like you know how to open the pickle jar, but you just can't get it open, right? So children learn what the affordance is, what the action is that's required before they can actually do the action. The second way that children can learn about hidden affordances is through social information that they get from others. So we asked mothers of young children to teach their kids to open Tupperware containers. And Tupperware is interesting because it requires a pulling action, and they're hard to open for a child unless you focus on the corner. And then we scored all of Mother's spontaneous teaching strategies. And the moms produced several verbal teaching strategies, like they oriented children to the task so they'd get their attention, look at it, look here. They would encourage them, open it, you can do it. And they'd remind them about the contents. Don't you want that Cheerio? There's a Cheerio inside. They described body environment relations. You need to use your hand. Open the lid. This is a big lid. And they sometimes highlighted the key action. You need to pull the lid, pull harder. But across ages, mothers' verbal strategies mostly were orienting phrases. They were things that kept the children on task, reminded them about the contents, encouraging them to keep going, keeping their attention on the job. Sometimes moms talk about body parts and closure features that are important, and sometimes they talked about the required action. But mostly moms don't talk about affordances. Mostly they're just encouraging the kid to figure it out on their own. The moms also spontaneously produced a suite of physical strategies. So just like with verbal, they used physical means to orient children and keep them on task. They'd like shake that Tupperware so the Cheerio rattled around and point to the contents and the lid. They highlighted the relevant action by modeling it, actually opening and then shutting the lid, or by gesturing what you need to do. And they did this other thing where they would actually change the affordance by simplifying the task. So they would partially open the lid. So now all the child has to do is kind of knock it off. Or they would put their hands on the child's hands to guide them. Or they would do part of the action, like stabilize the base while the child's working on the lid. Most of these kinds of physical manual things that mothers did, they did for the younger children. And mostly what they did for the younger children was to simplify the task to make the required action easier. Did anything moms do to teach about hidden affordances actually help the children? Yeah, but only simplifying the task help the children. The younger children, the babies under 24 months, can only open Tupperware if the moms simplify the task. And older children, 30 months and up, can open it without the mom having to change the task. So moms help with hidden affordance. It's really to change the affordance, to change the required action, rather than to teach the required action about what to do. Um, Infants can learn about hidden affordances from both self generated exploration and from social information. At first, they generate a slew of just totally futile strategies, and they recognize the correct action strategy before they can implement it successfully. Social information serves to keep them on task, and simplifying the task is most effective for doing. But what's most effective for learning about the actual required actions, the hidden affordances? That's what we're investigating now. Mm. Learning to move creates new affordances for action. It also instigates a cascade of developmental events, sometimes in domains that are far afield from motor actions at all. Certainly far afield from the initial skill. So one thing being able to move, one thing locomotion does is it alters infants' view of the world. The ability to locomote literally affects what infants see. This is what crawling infants, this is crawling infants' view of the world. So the top is showing you what crawlers are seeing while they're crawling. They are seeing the floor in front of their hands. And here's what walkers see. So walkers, while they're moving, can see the whole room. Everything is in their field of view. And here's the results of that experiment in a nutshell. These schematics are drawn to scale, and they're showing the average field of view for crawlers compared to walkers. While babies are crawling, they're mostly seeing the floor right in front of their hands. While babies are walking, they can see the whole room. So what crawlers do is they sit up. While they're crawling, their field of view is filled with floor. But as soon as they sit up, the whole room swoops into view, and they literally see the same things that walkers see. Like vision, locomotion also affects infants' play with objects. This graph is showing crawling and walking infants. They're all the same age, they're 13-month-olds, and they play the same amount with objects, and they play a lot, 30 to 40 minutes out of each hour. But as you'll see, the quality of their object play is really different depending on whether the babies are crawlers or walkers. The developmental transition from crawling to walking affects whether infants carry objects. So this is the amount of spontaneous carrying per hour in crawlers and walkers at 13 months. Walkers carry a lot more than crawlers do. One walker had 144 bouts of carrying in an hour. This is just like babies running around in their house. But crawling infants also can carry objects. Some crawlers are carrying objects 20 times in an hour. Sometimes, when infants are carrying objects, they use those objects to initiate interactions with their mothers. Now, since both crawlers and walkers can carry objects, do they carry the objects to share them with mom? Well, even though crawlers can carry objects, crawlers share objects with their mother from a stationary position. So they sit in one place, they hold up the object, the mother to look at them, or to come over to them. When they want to engage in an interaction with mother around objects, they stay in one place and mom has to come to them. Walkers share objects with their mother by picking it up and carrying it over to them. If a walker wants to share, they will pick up the object and they will bring it to mother and force it on them so that they can share it like that. It's my favorite because it's like a trap. Baby really wants to share an object. So
Thank you.
Walkers will travel to share an object with their mother. Crawlers share from a stationary position. That's the blue bar. Walkers also share objects from a stationary position. But in addition, they will approach their mothers with an object. So even though both crawlers and walkers can carry objects, when crawlers want to share objects with their mother, they wait for their moms to come to them or to respond to them from across the room. But when walkers want to share, they move over to their mom and they share the object. So these developmental changes in babies' posture are now cascading into how they are interacting with objects and how they're interacting with objects with their mother, now in a social interaction. Does it matter to the mom? The moms respond in different ways. Sometimes mothers just ignore their babies. Sometimes moms affirm that the baby did something. So this is like, yes, you're alive, but it's nothing more than that. Like they'll say, yes, okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sometimes moms use referential language. This is like nouns and adjectives, like they're giving real information about the object.
That's the duck.
Oh.
Yeah. Oh, orange ball.
And sometimes mothers use action directives. These are verbs and adverbs and function words, what you can do with an object.
Puppy, did you find your puppy? Should we look at the book together?
21 of the crawlers in our sample never carried objects to their mothers. They only shared from a stationary position. And when these infants held up an object and tried to share it, their moms mostly ignored or affirmed them. So they got nothing or they got like, thanks, yeah. Occasionally they used referential or action words. All 24 of the walkers did carry objects to their mothers. That's the red bars. And these moving bids for mom's attention, for interacting with mom, resulted in a big increase in action directives and function words. But 5 of the crawlers did carry objects to their mothers, and their moving bids are shown in the red bars. So when their data are compared with the walkers, it looks the same. Just like moms of walkers, mothers of crawlers are more likely to use action directives when their crawler approaches them with an object. So it's not like some little switch in the mom's brain, changes something about their verbal, like, oh, you're walking, now I'll use verbs, or something like that. What these data are showing you is that the ability to walk offered something to infants, It allowed them to interact with objects in a new and different way. So they're interacting more with distal objects, they're carrying objects more frequently, and they're more likely to carry an object over to their mother to share it with her. That then is influencing the language, the information that the baby is actually getting from mom in response. So crawling and walking affect how much infants travel and what they see. The transitions between crawling and sitting are shaping infants' exploration, and the development of walking is altering the way that infants act on objects and people and the way that their mothers respond to them. So I want to kind of sum up these ideas about learning to move. I've been arguing that infants learn to move and that their movements are creating new opportunities for learning, opportunities all over the place, new things to look at, new things to do. And what infants have to learn is to perceive affordances for action. The affordances that are directly accessible in the surface layout, like slopes and cliffs and chairs and walls and so on, and the hidden affordances that are, so much of our everyday lives. Their learning relies both on perceptual information that they generate from their own spontaneous activity and on social information that they get for free or that they ask for, request from their caregivers. New ways of moving and new affordances instigate developmental cascades, and I gave you a couple examples of that. I think that, these are just some sort of like vague thoughts about autism, but I think that disability can alter the way that children move, where they go, how frequently they're moving, the kinds of things that they're doing while they're moving, and thereby it's affecting opportunities for learning. We don't know what children with autism, and we actually don't know what children other than the children I just showed you are doing. Like we barely understand like what children in other cultures or children with any kind of disability. What happens if you have, cerebral palsy, like spastic diplegia that's so severe that you can't like lift your head up to look around, or you can't sit up so that you can manipulate objects, or so on. And I think that failure to use social information may affect learning about affordances, especially the hidden affordances that are so much part of everyday life. Different capacities for action, including looking, lead to a different kind of cascade of developmental events. And I want to end with a few comments about sharing behavioral development. So in my other job, the one when I should be sleeping, I am leading a project to build the community and cyber infrastructure for open sharing of video data among developmental scientists. We call this Databrary. The Databrary project is the tools and all the infrastructure to support this new community of researchers who are committed to sharing their videos. I hope you could see from the talk that these ideas about movement really come alive when you can see the videos. It's one thing for me to tell you that novice walkers go over the edge of a cliff. It's another thing for you to see it see it for yourself. And that's true for any ideas that you'll hear from any developmental scientist. Developmental data really come alive when you can see the phenomena for yourself. And science benefits from having many sets of eyes on the problem. The Databrary project is this data sharing project. It's funded by NSF and by NIH. And the idea is to help developmental scientists to get more out of their data by openly sharing their videos with other researchers. Behavior is infinitely rich and complex. So in the talk, you got a taste of some of the wonderful and crazy things that babies do. Video captures much of the wonderful richness and complexity of behavior. This little bit of video here is from a typically developing child. She may be more typical than usual, more beautiful and more talented, but she's typical. But children with disabilities, her mom's right there, that's why I'm saying about to have another child, also better than typical, but children with disabilities also generate incredibly rich behaviors, looking behaviors and facial expressions and vocalizations and exploratory behaviors. And they also engage in social interactions with other people. And they do language and movement and pretend play and perceiving things. And all of it is available on video. So video is really easy to record. And it turns out the average developmental lab is collecting 12 hours of video a week. But it's actually really expensive to collect data from infants. Anyone who's run an infant lab knows that half of them don't show up, and it's hard to work with babies, and it's really hard to work with children with disabilities like autism. So to take advantage of the richness and the complexity of video, we need tools. DataView is a free and open source tool that allows researchers to score and explore and visualize their video data or any behavioral stream. This is free, it's open source, it's an academic tool, and it's designed to help researchers to mine the richness of their videos. So you can visit the website, you can download a version and learn more about how you can benefit and contribute. And the Databrary itself is a library for housing raw video footage and coding spreadsheets and the code books and any other metadata. The aim is to promote open sharing of video among developmental science. Video is special. This is a really important point. Video is special. It's different from brain imaging and flat file data. Flat file data is like, imagine like researchers having numbers in like an Excel spreadsheet or a statistical package. It's different because when you get a brain image, you need to know how that image got made. You need to know everything about the data provenance for it to be useful. But video can speak for itself. You can see what the researcher did and how the child responded. And that means that other researchers can repurpose videos that were collected in another researcher's lab. You can ask questions that are far beyond the scope of the original study, questions that the original researcher had never even imagined. So, for example, my colleague Catherine Tamas-Lamonda here is an expert in early language. And we can be looking at, we have actually done this. We're looking at the exact same videos of children playing in their homes, and my people have the sound turned off, and they're counting steps and how many times the baby touches an object. And Kathy's lab is coding all the things that the baby has said and what the mom is saying in return, and they're not looking at all the steps. By sharing videos, we can increase transparency, we can speed scientific progress, and this is especially important for children with behavioral disabilities like autism. So, for example, to my knowledge, no major developmental psychology lab with expertise in motor development is addressing autism. If people who do have videos of children with autism or children, siblings at risk for autism, and they share those videos, then other people could do something with that data instead of the videos just moldering away on a shelf. Something like the ADOS, which is the standard test, it's just like the same kind of thing I've been showing you. It's babies in a playroom playing with toys and with their mom and with an experimenter. The same is true for a host of other behaviors. Really, it's only limited by your imagination. And then finally, behavior is forever. It's always interesting. It's really interesting. Even 100 years later, it's still interesting. So Databrary has acquired the Gazelle archives, which he was like the most famous developmental psychologist and pediatrician between the 1920s and the 1940s. He was like Spears and Spock and all of them rolled into one. And he collected all his data on film. And so 16 millimeter film. And so Andrew Gordon here has been, digitizing the films and, blah, 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 curating. Anyway, it's totally fascinating, these films of children from, whatever many years ago. So Databrary will store data indefinitely. And if you visit databrary.org, you can learn more about open video data sharing. And we're always hiring. So if you know anyone or you want a really great job, look us up and talk to us. So that's it. Thanks.